Hello everybody, I don't have time to make a quote-unquote proper video this week, so I'm just going to do something I thought might be interesting and might be sort of helpful, insightful if you will, in the meantime. I'm going to go over the video I made, the time-lapse I made of me making an RTS in 72 hours, which was my Ludum Dare game for Ludum Dare 49. In 72 hours I made kind of a weird RTS thing. It was way too ambitious of a game to try and make for a game jam, but I kind of did that on purpose. I kind of did that knowingly. One of the reasons I did that was because it was gonna, hopefully, and it did, teach me a whole bunch of things. I was going to be made to do things I'd never done before. I could try things in a slightly different style to ways I've done things before. And I knew that coming out of this, I was going to not necessarily have made like an excellent game in 72 hours, but I would have learned a ton of things about making a type of game I'm really interested in, but I've never really done a whole lot of making before. I've done bits of RTS-y type things, but like I haven't really done this sort of style. I'll just skip to the end so you can see some of the actual game that we end up with. So like you can kind of place buildings. You've got these units that like move around and like do context-sensitive commands. We've got like this isometric world. I did that because I kind of, it's kind of a blend of things I did know how to do. So I would be at some sort of like, I'd have some sort of like advantage going into this, right? Like it's not entirely new stuff. Like, let's say I've made isometric games in jams before. I have made some like unit selection and moving and stuff in jams before. I've done this kind of like art style before. Like I'm combining tools that I've acquired over time to like make a new thing, right? So day one, the first thing I was doing was isometric rendering. Obviously, I've done this before. I've done videos on this. There are some like extra kind of like nuances with me wanting to move the camera around and stuff like that that I hadn't really thought of when I did the videos on this at the time. Some people have requested I do new isometric tutorial videos or like go over more stuff with it. I think after making this game, I could certainly probably do that. I think there's a few more things I could talk about now, whereas before I probably have only done kind of more basic stuff with isometric stuff. So, I was just teaching what I had experience in. I obviously can't teach stuff I don't know anything about, like that's, it doesn't really work. So yeah, so I'm mostly though was just using stuff I already kind of knew how to do and reworking it just like a little bit to make it kind of work with the camera, because I wanted to be able to scroll the camera in kind of every direction. Tile types and manipulation. This was like there's an interesting, I think I used a whole lot of like structs and stuff like that for doing this. So like every tile kind of had a struct which contained all of like the information on it. And learning to like just work with structs was cool because like there's just a lot of little nuances with things and structs and what can end up making values undefined and things like that, and just sort of how they behave depending on like where and how you define them and how you interact with them and that kind of thing. The only way you really learn all that stuff, it's hard to make a tutorial going over that kind of thing. As I say, like I made like a guide on structs and like how to use them in basics, but you'll find when you just start using them, you run into all kinds of just weird stuff. Just like with anything in code, like that's true of that's not just true of structs, that's just true of programming, right? And it's tricky with like trying to teach people and do tutorials and stuff like that, like to get all these nuances across, because you really just learn them with experience, and a lot of it is also being connected to the community. So if you're not already and you're learning Game Maker, like go join like the Game Maker, the subreddit, the r/Game Makers Discord. Like it's really good. Just hang out there, ask questions about just like the inner workings of bits of code you don't understand and so on, and share information that you've learned about how things work with other people. That really accelerates the process. Does like really helps me out a lot hanging out in there. I learn all kinds of things. But as I say, mostly it comes from there, like the community, and it comes from experience. It's really hard to get all of that stuff across because it's just so many tiny specific little details, right? But yeah, I'm having a good time just learning how to use like structs to sort of control all the different tiles and like what kind of types they should be, and like how I can like write code to manipulate those tiles. I realized there I want the artwork to be a bit bigger, so you can see I've just sort of made them all bigger, but I haven't like spaced them out probably again. There we go, they're bigger now. And then I waste 2.5 hours trying to properly, quote unquote, properly depth sort like all of my humans. They seem like doing some maths in Paint and stuff like that. MS Paint, very, very useful tool in Game Jam for trying to like mentally work things out. I use that all the time. But in here, yeah, I'm trying to do this thing where I get the world object, which is currently rendering all of my isometric tiles. I'm like, oh, if I can also render the humans at the same time, that'll keep them like properly depth sorted, like depending on which, like who is in what tile and what like position on the tile they're in and that kind of thing. And like, I come close to a solution on this, but it's like, it's messy and buggy and it doesn't work, and I don't like anything about how I've written it. And eventually I realized that I didn't need to do this at all, and I could just do depth sorting the way I kind of always do, right? Yeah, realizing I wasted 2.5 hours thinking about this. Eventually I just make the human like depth sort, like depth equals negative y, essentially. Not quite negative y, because the thing with isometric games is like, so the game world as it stands is actually like kind of a rectangle of tiles, like a normal like top-down 2D like look, and I like translate it to isometric, so it goes from being that rectangle to being kind of like a diamond, or whatever the name is of like a stretched, whatever a rectangular diamond is called, I don't know, whatever the name of that shape is. But it gets translated from one to the other, so it's not technically their Y position, because their Y position is kind of like going down in like this direction that I'm doing with the mouse. It's their negative isometric Y position. So it's like how far up the screen they are, like kind of a combination of their X and Y on that rectangle. But in the isometric projection, it's kind of like it will be like they're straight down. But that was actually like, this is super simple, and like I can write exceptions for other kinds of depth or whatever. Like my concern with it was like, oh, what about like buildings, and what if I want to do like hills and like the tiles like going up and down, that kind of thing. But I can write specific exceptions for those situations to adjust their depth accordingly. Like I put like a buffer on top of their like Z position, if you will. And like I didn't need to do this like ultra fancy like depth sorting thing. It was just a total waste of time. And sometimes that happens, sometimes that happens. It's a tough thing to happen in a game jam when you've got such a limited time, because I'm aiming for 48 hours. We end up just settling for doing the jam version, which is 72 hours. So it's a nice backup option you always have in the Lirum Diary. It's a way I recommend often trying to do it, is like aim for the 48 hours, because it'll make you try and like go even faster. And then like if you like just totally don't make it, you can give yourself another 24 hours if you've got the freedom and flexibility in your life to do that. It's a nice option to have. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's any grand lesson or takeaway from that. It's just like overthinking things in game jams is often a bad idea. Like you've got to find that balance of just like, what do you actually need to do, like, and trying to predict like what the ramifications are of doing something one way on like how you're going to code it later. It's very, very tricky. And sometimes you get it wrong. I got it wrong there. I just didn't need the thing I was writing to work in the way I was writing it. Mouse selection of units. So this is kind of tricky in that same way. So I was just talking about how like, isometric. So normally this would be like really easy in a way, right? We would just like get a box and just be like, okay, in this rectangle, is this object in this rectangle? Then like select it. Or whatever, right? And that's kind of what I end up doing, but it's like tricky because of things being like projected into the isometric, because this human here is not actually at this like screen position. It's just being drawn here because that's its isometric position. Like, as I said, the world is actually like a rectangle of these tiles, and it's being drawn as an isometric world of diamonds, right? So if I just like ask to get like a rectangle of the room that's like here, like based on where my mouse is or whatever, it actually gets back in the isometric world an isometric rectangle of things, right? So I have to like, I think what I end up just doing is like kind of taking that taking a screen position of the rectangle and converting and getting the isometric position of all these dudes, and then checking to see if any of those are in the rectangle, and kind of like, it's like not a very like what's it called, efficient or like elegant way of doing it, but it worked and was elegant in the sense that I could understand the flow of it very, very quickly. These are kind of the skills you develop if you did a lot of drag and drop, which I didn't, but like I developed these skills nonetheless. So trying to find like these sort of just like quick, very straight to the point solutions that don't worry about being too clever, which is what I wish I had more of in my head when I was thinking about the depth sorting. But yeah, like I think I did have to do a little bit of maths or whatever, because I think someone in the chat remember helping me out with this. I can't actually remember exactly how it ended up being, but I don't remember it being too hard. Anyway, world generation and camera. So then this is me trying to getting some game out of this. I'm like, okay, well, I need to procedurally generate like a world. Because like the idea for my game is like, well, I actually don't have the idea for the game at this point. I just know I want to do a kind of RTS in a crumbling world because the theme was unstable. So I was like, okay, I can have a world full of these tiles that are like falling apart. I guess kind of like, I don't know, in like a Bastion kind of way, right? Where the world's like falling apart in these sort of like isometric kind of tiles. And then just sort of RTS. My idea was like maybe you just try and survive for as long as possible. Eventually it became like you like grow a little village and you make your way towards like a portal to get yourself off of the world or something like that. Where were we? So anyway, I wanted to have like, so I knew I wanted to have like crumbling tiles and like a world that was like falling apart. And I wanted to have like these little islands that you build bridges between. So I was trying to like, this is tricky with procedural generation to try and like make a formula, as you will, that like generates a world that is actually like stands a chance of having good gameplay, right? You can't be too random. This is the thing. Players, we don't actually like randomness in the games, all right? Controversial sounding statement, but I really stand behind it. I don't think anyone really likes true randomness in games. What we like is variety. All right, we like variety of outcomes, I'm talking a bit too generally because obviously we sometimes like randomness in like the chances of things. You know, we like to gamble and things like that. That's kind of a different thing. But I mean, like when it comes to like level design and things like that, we don't like randomness. We like variety. And so like trying to create something that actually creates something quite similar each time, but provides variety and provides like different strategies, different like gameplay, different emergent kind of like moments and interactions. It's quite difficult to get right, and it involves being a lot less random than most people think, you know? It involves a lot of just weighing things in certain directions and forcing certain outcomes. So I end up like creating like a thing that will guarantee, like you probably saw a few frames of me experimenting with like a really big like chunk in the middle that you would start with. I ended up reducing that to like a cross that you would start with, varying the amount of like difference between like the worlds. I used like a Perlin noise thing that I worked on a really long time. I might do a tutorial on that at some point if I haven't done already. Yeah, I don't think I ever have done like a Perlin noise. Maybe I can just like put something on screen real quick. Yeah, so Perlin noise is basically like an algorithm that generates like something like this, right? If you've ever used like, you know, the render clouds like filter in Photoshop, it's like that, right? And it's very, very useful for game dev because essentially what it's doing is creating a long like, you know, array or 2D grid, or if you will, of values between like 0 and 1 or -1 and 1 or whatever, right? That like flow like smoothly from one to the next, you know, they'll all kind of like interpolate between one another. So you can use that for all kinds of things, like, you know, creating like ocean, in this case, like creating like islands and gaps between the islands that appear in a kind of like natural like seeming way. You use it for like height maps, like creating a mountain range and things like that. I mean, that's just in terrain. There's like a million game dev uses for it. Really highly recommend like looking up and kind of learning about that if you can. I might do a tutorial video on that at some point. But yeah, that's basically all about like the world generation. That's how I did that, to try and create those islands that kind of like looked, because I can't just like, if I just did like every tile is randomly like a tile or not a tile, like it just wouldn't work. It would be too random. It would just look like absolute chaos. Sometimes it would just have entire like huge flat zones, and like it wouldn't look good. It wouldn't feel good to play, and so on. So yeah, you have to be quite clever and with procedural generation to get things that like actually fit your gameplay. Anyway, moving on from that, unit pathfinding. So this was going to be a tricky one because like, I've done this kind of thing before, but I like only a couple of times. So I always thought I have to look in the manual for how like any of these pathfinding things work. And I always struggle to get my head around like the path resource and things like that a little bit. But here this actually came together fairly well. Like I One thing I've been doing in this project quite well is just, using a whole lot of functions and like basically writing most of the code for a given object in the create event as different functions, as states and so on. Step event for most objects is just state, open bracket, close bracket, and it just sort of runs itself through all of these different functions that are all in one place. And the pathing worked out okay. The thing that was different this time from pathing I'd done before was like, I kind of wanted it to behave like tribal tension and other things I've done where you can select things and move things, or like tower defense games where things move. All the units don't care about each other. They just make a path and they go there. And I've never really known how to do anything like a swarm behavior or anything like that where like units like move together. You see how they kind of do in that way, and when I move them, they kind of like spread out at the kind of positions. They still don't really care about each other. Like they don't like have proper collision or whatever, but they like have smart enough looking behavior that they kind of move in a way that feels nice in a kind of RTS way. And I was proud of eventually getting that to work. It was kind of simpler than I thought it would be generally. Like I would tell them to move somewhere, and then they would go there, and and they would just sort of like sequentially give themselves target destinations that weren't like occupied by anyone else, and it would kind of like grow in like a spiral, right? Again, it feels very inelegant because it's like, oh my god, they just keep checking and checking and checking until they find somewhere. That's nightmarish, but it actually doesn't, like when you're just issuing single commands and they're just getting this path like once. That's the key thing with pathfinding, is to just not do it too often. Don't like run like find a new path to this position every single frame or whatever, because then that's going to get really expensive. You just do it when you need to, or when something updates, or when something becomes a problem, when something gets in the way of wherever they want to go, and so on. And then it actually becomes that quite light. I think this is the end of day 1. Yeah, I think I just raided someone or whatever, and then day 2. So yeah, that. Got a long way to go before we got any kind of video game. As I say, I knew going into this it was probably going to be a 72-hour one. Tile degradation over time. Yes, this is me sort of drawing different tiles and having them like eventually like kind of decay over time. This was actually really tricky because of like I wanted in theory like an infinite world, and I realized I wasn't going to be able to do that, so I eventually limited the size of the world. And but like even with limiting the size of the world, like updating every single tile like over a course of like a really big map, like even just doing it once every like 60 frames or whatever, like updating all these structs at once. Oh no, that turned out to really slow the game down a lot. Just doing like a massive like iteration on so much data, like just caused a whole lot of lag. So like I had to find like some sort of solution to this. So the numbers you see on the tiles are like the health of the tile, and I want them to be like slowly degrading over time with a bit of randomness here and there. And it's like, how do I do that across all these different tiles? And honestly, I still don't know the best answer. Like I don't know what like Factorio does or whatever. It's like a good answer to this. If people have ideas about this, I'm really curious about like what like the best sort of solution to this sort of thing is. I got a thing through on the Game Maker Surgery kind of asking about this, and it was on stream at one point. And I had like a couple of little ideas, but I don't know if, and I'll go over what I did, but like I don't know what like the industry standard or whatever for like trying to update like a huge world like actually is. And I think it's actually just maybe it's kind of just a hard problem, but let me know if there's some secret like super elegant solution out there that I've just missed. Tell me, because like be super exciting to learn about. But what I chose to do, for better or for worse, is I decided to essentially update what the camera could see, and keep track of how much time has passed. So what I would then do is when I scrolled the camera further, and with a bit of a buffer, so not just what the camera can see here, but with like a bit of a buffer outside. So we're updating a whole bunch of tiles, but not too many, not so many that it's going to cause a performance problem. And then if I scroll a bit further, and we're like, because I'm already controlling how much I render as well. I'm only rendering a certain number of tiles based on where the camera is. But if I start to render more tiles and I need to suddenly update them, what I do is I ask how much time has passed since they were last like part of what each tile knows is when it was last updated. So if some more than like one tick, a tick in my game being like I think every 60 frames or 1 second or whatever, right? if more than 1 second has passed since it was last updated, it means like it was off screen. And then what I would do is essentially apply a whole bunch of just multiply the updating effect on it by the amount of time that's passed, essentially, for this basic thing of just like the thing decaying over time, right? Which works with very, very simple updating. If it was just linearly decreasing over time, that would actually be perfect. But the thing is, I involve a bit of randomness in like how much these decay, and then trying to like apply that randomness to something that's like if I scroll off screen or something's like, oh, suddenly I need to decrease by 12 and a random amount of 0 and 5 for every frame that's passed between. Like working out the maths of that was kind of tricky to get it to behave in a way that was correct, because I couldn't just like apply the average, because like randomness doesn't give you the average, it gives you randomness, and so like the stuff on screen is going to behave slightly differently to the stuff off screen. But I got it to a point where it's close enough that the player can't tell, so that was all that really mattered. And it wasn't just like the health and stuff that would update about frame. I think that was mostly it, but there were other things like trees and things like that, and so on, and other stuff about the frame that need to be updated. And yeah, it got kind of tricky, and I don't know how manageable it would have been over like a large scale project to do that kind of thing. But it might have just been the approach. I don't know what the best solution to that kind of thing is. Maybe, as I say, maybe it's just picking and choosing, like certain tiles like always update, like if and things that are just applied at every single tile or whatever. You've got to do something just clever like this. And like specific tiles that have like specific edge cases, maybe just force them to always update. I don't know, it's tricky. It was a really difficult issue, but I was reasonably happy with my solution. It was like, it was something I came up with, and it worked for the game I wanted. Trees were kind of cool. Say I just like drawing little pixel art trees and getting them to like fall down and stuff like that. Eventually ended up giving them the mechanic whereby like if there were trees on a tile, it would never become unstable and fall, and it would also pass that stability to the tiles around it, so you would need to leave some trees alive. It was just like I'm mostly just making a cool thing, and I'm not thinking too hard about the game design here, and I'm just kind of throwing it together with things I think are kind of cool. So there's like, it's totally like down to chance whether or not the game actually ends up being fun. Like this is not the way to design your game at all, really. I mean, it can be if you I'm not saying, but like if you really want it to be good as a goal, like it's probably not the best solution. Context sensitive commands and cutting trees, right? So this is now like me getting it. So like when I right click, when I've got these units selected, game will like do things. So I can already get them to move, but like I want to make it so if I right click on a tree, it'll do something else instead. And that's why I have all these like different human states and stuff, and like commands I can give in the mouse event. Like let's say that the mouse object contains all the stuff that works out what to tell the human to do, what state to send the human into. And then once the human is in that state, they just go and do that thing. They have like a goal, and they like look after themselves from that point on. Humans being able to fall to their doom. So obviously I could write a little bit of exception into like how to depth sort them, but that was like not too difficult. And just like getting them to like actually like fall off the map and animate them and that kind of thing. That wasn't too bad at all, actually. Building bridges and more pathfinding. So yeah, it became tricky when I realized like I had to pathfind not just to like a specific tile or whatever, not just like a connection of like the grid, which was kind of like the easy part, but I also had to like pathfind to get to as close as possible to a tile where I wanted to build a bridge, because obviously I want to build a bridge. If I want to build a bridge, I've got to build it somewhere where there's no floor. So like I can't tell them to go to that tile. I've got to tell them to go to like a tile near it that they can reach, and that throws a few spanners in the work. But it ended up not being too bad. And like, yeah, like what to do with like telling them to build a bridge they can't reach and so on. There's like just loads of little edge cases with the pathfinding and like when tiles update and trying to like know when I have to update the paths and stuff like that. Like it was complicated, and I definitely learned a lot. And the only way you really learn is to try and do it, because there's just so many edge cases that you're not going to have thought of, and I can't go over all of them. Like there's so many things, and really, like I say, like having an excuse like this, like I'm just gonna make an RTS for a game jam, is honestly the best way I could have possibly picked to try and learn it. Because like I'm forced to just come up with something and be like, okay, this is this, and to deal with all those edge cases and suddenly, and now if I ever try to make something again like this, all of those cases and edge cases will be in my head from before, and I'm like, oh, okay, I remember all of the stuff that goes into this, and it'll also help me like estimate how long some of the stuff takes to do and so on, because I'll kind of know more about what the problems are I need to solve. Building houses and farms. So like I'm starting at this point, like things are accelerating a bit and we're getting more and more game in, because like more and more of the foundation is kind of done. So stuff is starting to appear just in the game a little bit more rapidly. I had some issues with like trying to work out like whether or not I could build a thing on a thing, and like sending how to pathfind to it and all that kind of thing, and whether or not I could build a farm on a thing based on whether or not there was already a house on the tile. Like I would constantly run into new things I would have to build new foundation work for, you know? It's hard. You don't know what you need until you need it. And you've done it once. Once you've done it once, it really helps for the future. Here I actually managed to use one of the unique things in Game Maker where like you can kind of draw while animating. It's kind of a weird feature, but I used that to kind of draw a swirly thing on the portal, make like a cool animated effect on it. So that was kind of neat. That was where I decided, because I was like, what is this game actually about? What do you actually have to do? So I kind of just very much shoehorned like an objective, and you just got to get to this portal and like make bridges and like build up people and survive. And it's like, yeah, it's this stats finally conceding the game needs a goal. That's definitely how it felt, like, you know, because I was just like, I just made a cool thing or whatever, but like now it's like I've got 6 hours and we got to submit something. So now I'm gonna try my best to apply game design and make like an actual thing, because it's basically been a learning exercise until this point, and now it's like, well, I've got 6 hours to go, let's try and actually polish this into a thing, which is like, again, not the way you want to approach it if you're really trying to make like if your goal is really like, I want to make a good game or something that's just really, really fun. You want to kind of be weaving all that game design into all the decisions you make throughout the thing, rather than just like, I'm just going to make something cool and then find the fun. That's more of like a long-term project sort of approach. Whereas like at a game jam, you probably want to kind of know a bit more about the fun before you go into it. It could work, but it's a lot riskier. We'll say it that. I'll say that, doing it this way. It's a lot riskier. User interface. I do like D/T because like Game Maker and user interface could be a pain, but it actually wasn't all that bad. Like it just did it in really simple ways. Just kind of draw a GUI, stuck some stuff on the screen, had the mouse object handle. If it was in this zone and it was in the appropriate state, then it would care more about what it was clicking on here than it would clicking about anything in the game. So the way I'd set up the mouse object made all this quite straightforward. I did look into like where I could do Scribble or whatever to do tooltips and things like that, but I just like kind of hard coded some easy like tooltip stuff because I don't have any time. Don't even have any sound effects or anything. I really wanted to do sound effects, but I never got time and everything. Start and end states tidying up. I don't think I did. Did I do like a wah noise when people fall off? Maybe I did. I don't know. If I did, that was probably the only sound effect. So yeah, at this point, yeah, like 2 hours to go. I'm just wrapping in I just want to. This is the key I have to making sure that most of my games, like even when they're just like an experimental mess like this, still place reasonably high. Is like I do my best to put a ribbon on the game. You know, I give it like a start screen. I give it an end screen. I don't know if I should do this every time. Maybe I could have spent more time learning stuff, but I feel compelled to do this. It's just the way I always do game jams. I always like try and have like really try and round off all the corners in the last like few hours. Though, like unfortunately, I didn't. As I said, I don't think I really got sounds done. I didn't get music done. That would have been like the final cherry on top. That's what I would have done if I had 30 more minutes. You know, but like I do my absolute best to like just wrap everything up in a nice package, you know, like I did a nice background, or we did, like I'm doing a title screen here that looks okay. And I do like an end state, and just make sure you can like win, you can lose. It kind of tells you about like how you lost. I've got like tool tips on the things that tell you how to play it. I try and make sure it's as like standalone playable as possible, you know, and it doesn't feel like half. It doesn't just feel half-baked, you know? That's just part of me and how I do game jams. I don't know, you know, I have to do that. That's just part of my approach. And there we had it. We ended up with a thing. Took 72 hours to get there. It actually has it has an actual honest to god loading screen, just because it took the Perlin noise generation and everything like actually takes a bit of time for most computers. So like all I literally did was just like I draw this frame, like this loading and the tip thing, and then I just like I literally draw this and then do like room go to next or whatever. So like it's not actually like a proper loading screen or whatever, you know, it's not doing anything asynchronous. I literally just draw this as a frame and then like start doing the generation, and obviously it's not going to draw the world and everything until it's finished that. So like we end up with just a cool static loading screen that just shows that for like however many frames. And then eventually like we load this in, which shows you the portal, like shows you where you kind of need to go, and then you start, right? You start like cutting trees down, like making like houses to get more people, to cut down more trees, to build things faster, and so on. And like slowly start building a bridge, and you know kind of what direction you need to go in. We've got kind of like, we can kind of pan the camera around, we can build stuff, and they like gather and build. Oh, I didn't really go over that either, but that's just kind of code again. Like I think like Tribal Tension taught me how to do this, where like, you know, I just like sort of do draw sprite part or whatever to like draw like some of the thing like up in reverse like that and build it up over time. It's kind of a neat effect. Like a lot of these effects, like if you look at all my old Game Jam games, you'll see how much just like how many techniques I just steal continuously from old games, which is what kind of allows me overall, I think, to do more and more complex games for game jams, even if it's still a bad idea given the amount of time you actually have. But it makes it like kind of feasible when you eventually have that much kind of experience behind you. And the only way to get it is to do lots. So if you're thinking about like, oh, I've never done a game jam before, should I do it? Yes, do them. Do lots of them. They kind of have diminishing returns over time, but like in a way they also kind of don't, because you just keep building a tool set, and that tool set is what allows you to make cool stuff. Anyway, hope that was interesting to you guys. As I say, it was just kind of like a throwaway recording. I know it's just like half an hour long. Maybe it was interesting, maybe it wasn't. I don't know. I feel like I say that with a lot of my videos. But yeah, I didn't really have time to like properly script something this week, so I've literally just opened this up and started recording. I hope that's useful for some of you guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.